I didn't expect to have a new roommate, let alone someone like him. My name's Tyler. I'm 26, live in San Diego, and work as a project manager for a mid-sized startup that somehow still acts like it's run out of a frat house. Rent in this city is a nightmare, and after my last roommate bailed to move in with his boyfriend in Silver Lake, I knew I couldn't afford the place on my own for long. I'd planned on taking a few weeks to find someone decent, maybe even a friend of a friend situation. But life doesn't work like that. It was my landlord who made the call. Apparently, my old roommate had already arranged a subletter without telling me. I got the text while I was still at work. "Hey Ty, just FY, someone named Evan's moving in tomorrow. He already paid. Shouldn't be a problem. He's cool." I reread the message 3 times like maybe it would change. Evan? Who the hell was Evan? When I got home the next day, there was a suitcase by the door, a pair of beat-up Vans neatly set beside it, and voices in the kitchen. Plural. I walked in to find Evan laughing with my neighbor Jess. That was the first moment I saw him. He was leaning against the counter like he owned the place. Messy brown hair, a tattoo sleeve on his left arm that peeked out from under a worn white tee, and a crooked smile that made me forget whatever smart-ass comment I'd been about to make. Jess looked up first. "Ty, this is Evan. Your new roomie," she said cheerfully, sipping her matcha like it wasn't 7 p.m. Evan turned and offered his hand. "Hey, I know this is kinda last minute." His voice was low, calm, the kind of voice that made you lean in without realizing it. "Yeah," I said, taking his hand. "Little bit." He nodded like he expected that answer and didn't take it personally. "I'll stay out of your way. I just needed a spot for a few months. Promise I won't trash the place." I wasn't sure what to say. He didn't look like the kind of guy who needed saving. He looked like the guy who was the problem, and not in a bad way. Still, I figured I'd give it a few days before deciding whether or not I needed to sleep with my door locked. But by the end of the first week, I realized something. Evan was quiet, clean, considerate. The kind of guy who brewed real coffee in the morning and actually asked if I wanted some, instead of just draining the pot. The kind of guy who didn't just ignore me when I came home from work looking dead inside, but also didn't push. He had this way of being around without being in the way, which, in roommate terms, is practically sainthood. Still, I couldn't figure him out. He worked odd hours, something about freelance photography and working with local brands. Sometimes he'd disappear for a couple days and come back with sand in his shoes and sunburn on his cheeks. Once, I came into the living room and found him editing photos on the couch, shirtless, earbuds in, eyes squinting at the screen like he was trying to make the pixels behave. I tried not to stare. I failed. One night, after a long-ass week of late meetings and even later takeout dinners, I found myself on the balcony nursing a beer. Evan walked out a few minutes later, barefoot, carrying a half-eaten burrito in one hand and his camera in the other. "Rough week?" he asked, sliding onto the chair next to me. "Something like that," I muttered. "My boss thinks urgent means ignore the timestamp and call Tyler whenever." He laughed, a low sound that somehow made my shoulders loosen. "Sounds like someone needs tequila." I raised my bottle. "This is as close as I'm getting tonight." We sat there in silence for a bit, the kind that felt strangely easy. Eventually, he turned his camera on, snapped a picture of the skyline, then, without warning, turned it on me and clicked again. I blinked. "Did you just take my picture?" "Yeah," he said, totally unapologetic. "You looked interesting." "Interesting how?" He didn't answer right away, just studied the tiny screen, then shrugged. Tired. Real. That word stuck with me. Real. It had been a long time since anyone looked at me and saw something more than just the guy who handles spreadsheets and reschedules meetings when people flake. Evan saw something else. And suddenly, I couldn't stop wondering what else he might see. After that night on the balcony, something shifted. Nothing obvious. Not at first. Evan still came and went, like always. Still wore that beat-up hoodie with the thumbholes. Still left the window cracked in the kitchen, because he said, stale air makes him anxious. But there was a new rhythm to how we moved around each other. A quieter awareness. The kind you don't talk about, but feel like static under the surface. I started noticing him more. Like, really noticing. The way he'd lean over the sink brushing his teeth, one hip cocked lazily like he didn't even realize how damn good he looked standing there. Or how he'd hum under his breath when editing late at night, something low and gravelly. Not quite a tune, more like the sound of someone completely lost in their head. One night, I walked into the living room to find him stretched out on the floor, barefoot, surrounded by printed photos. He looked up at me and smiled. "You ever get so deep into a project you forget to eat?" he asked. "Every day," I said, sitting beside him, especially if it means I don't have to cook. We sat there for over an hour, just talking about nothing and everything. His childhood in Arizona, my favorite bands from high school, our worst jobs. At one point he asked, "You ever date anyone in the office?" I shook my head. "I'm not a total masochist." "Shame," he said with a grin, his eyes flicking over to me like he was seeing something new. By the time I stood to head to bed, he looked up and said, "Hey, Tyler?" "Yeah?" He paused. "You're easy to talk to." That shouldn't have hit the way it did. But it stayed with me. A few days later, we had a blackout. A storm rolled in out of nowhere. And just like that, boom, no lights, no Wi-Fi, no nothing. I was halfway through heating up leftovers when the microwave blinked off. "Shit," I muttered. From the other room, Evan called out, "You kill the power?" "Unless I suddenly learned how to control weather, no." He laughed, then came into the kitchen with 2 candles and a flashlight tucked under his arm. "Romantic," I said dryly, lighting one of the candles. "You joke, but this is kind of nice," he said, propping the flashlight up so it bathed the room in soft light. We ended up on the couch, eating cold pasta, drinking beers straight from the bottle, and talking again. It felt weirdly intimate. Just us, the flicker of candlelight, the hum of wind outside. Everything else gone. At one point, our legs brushed. Not by accident. Not anymore. He didn't move his. Neither did I. I looked at him, and he looked back, and I swear the whole world narrowed to that moment. I should. I started, not even knowing where I was going with that. But then he leaned in, just slightly, enough that I felt his breath. Just enough. "You should what?" he asked, voice low. I didn't answer. I just stood up, heart racing, and muttered something about needing air. I practically fled to the balcony, not stopping until I was leaning against the railing, the cold air sharp in my lungs. I stood there like an idiot, watching the rain hit the pavement, wondering what the hell I was doing, what we were doing. And then I heard the sliding door behind me. Evan stepped out, barefoot, shirtless, arms crossed over his chest. He stood beside me without saying a word. For a long time, we just stared out into the dark. Then he said, "You felt that too, right?" I nodded. "Yeah." He looked over at me, really looked, and for once, there wasn't a trace of sarcasm or humor in his face. "So what now?" I turned to him, and even though every rational part of me was screaming that this was complicated and messy and way too soon, I said the only honest thing I could think of. "I don't know." Evan nodded slowly, then whispered, "Okay." He didn't push, didn't try to touch me. He just stood beside me in the dark, silent and steady. But I knew things weren't the same anymore. The lines had blurred, and deep down, I didn't want to redraw them. The next few days were weird. Not bad weird, just charged. We didn't talk about the blackout, or what almost happened on the balcony. Evan went back to his usual routine. Editing photos, running errands, making those protein smoothies that smelled like banana and despair. I threw myself into work, burying myself in client emails and deadlines, anything to stop my mind from replaying that moment over and over. But everything felt different, tighter, like something was coiled between us, and neither of us wanted to be the first to pull. One night, I stayed late at the office trying to finish a pitch deck, and by the time I got home, it was past midnight. I expected Evan to be asleep, but as soon as I opened the door, I smelled garlic and heard music playing low from the kitchen. He was still up, cooking. He looked over his shoulder and smiled. I figured you'd be starving. Are you psychic now? I asked, dropping my backpack by the couch. No. Just figured if I'm hungry, you probably are too. He plated a second helping of pasta, penne with some creamy tomato sauce that smelled better than anything I'd eaten all week, and handed it to me without ceremony. We sat at the kitchen island, eating in comfortable silence. It should have felt domestic. Maybe it did. But it also felt like something more. Like something just under the surface that neither of us wanted to name. After we ate, I washed the dishes, and Evan leaned against the counter, sipping a beer and watching me. You always do that? He asked. What? Clean up right away. Like you're trying to erase the evidence of living. I paused, holding a wet plate. I guess I just don't like mess. Evan tilted his head. Even the good kind? I didn't answer. I just rinsed the last dish and set it to dry. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my body wired and my mind loud. I kept replaying the kitchen scene in my head, his voice, his eyes, the way he said, good kind. I don't even know why it got to me. Maybe because for the first time I wasn't sure if he was talking about dinner or about us. Eventually, I gave up. I pulled on a hoodie and stepped out into the hallway, planning to grab water from the kitchen. But as I passed Evan's door, I noticed the light was still on. Then I heard music. Not loud, just a faint, pulsing beat, something ambient and moody. I hesitated for half a second, then knocked. Yeah? He called. I opened the door. Evan was lying on his bed, shirtless, his laptop open beside him, headphones around his neck. He looked up and smiled. You can't sleep either? I shook my head. Came for water. Heard the music. He patted the edge of the bed. Come in. I'll play you something better. I don't know what possessed me, but I stepped inside and sat at the edge of his bed. He unplugged his headphones and let the music flow through the speakers. Soft, hypnotic, some indie band I'd never heard of but already kind of loved. He leaned back against the headboard, arms behind his head, and just looked at me. Not in a creepy way, not like he was waiting for anything, just like he saw me. I used to sleep to music every night, he said quietly. Felt less alone that way. I nodded slowly. I get that. We sat in silence again, but not the awkward kind. The kind that felt full. Eventually I said, "This is nice." He looked over at me, his voice low. "You can stay if you want." I should have said no, I really should have. But instead, I kicked off my slippers, pulled my legs up onto the bed, and leaned back beside him. Not touching. Not even close, but close enough. We lay there for a long time, just breathing, just listening. The music played on, slow and steady, and eventually, without thinking, I shifted, just a little. My shoulder brushed his, then his thigh. He didn't move away, and neither did I. I didn't fall asleep that night, not really. Lying next to Evan, barely touching, was like trying to sleep during a thunderstorm. Too much electricity, too much noise under the quiet. I kept my eyes closed, but I wasn't fooling anyone, especially not myself. Somewhere around 3 a.m., Evan moved. Not a lot, just enough to shift his arm so that it draped lightly across my stomach. Not possessive, not bold, just there. I tensed, unsure if I should breathe, unsure if this was some kind of accident. But his fingers moved, slow, gentle, like he was testing a theory. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. He whispered, "You still awake?" I nodded. He paused, and I could feel the hesitation vibrating off him. Then, very softly, "Is this okay?" I turned my head to look at him. The room was dark, but the city lights spilled faintly through the blinds, catching the sharp angle of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. "It's okay," I said quietly. We didn't kiss. We didn't even do anything. Just stayed there, in that almost too intimate, not quite a hug, our bodies barely pressed together under the soft weight of a shared blanket. I didn't sleep after that. Neither did he. But neither of us moved. By morning, it was like nothing had happened. He was already up when I wandered into the kitchen. Shirtless, of course, hair wet from a shower. He slid a mug of coffee toward me without looking up from his phone. "Sleep okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Cool." And just like that, we were back in roommate mode, which was somehow worse than if he'd kissed me and ghosted. Because now there was a thing between us, something real, something raw, and we were pretending like it wasn't there. The rest of that week was a blur. We didn't talk about that night. We didn't touch. But the tension didn't go away. It grew. Little things started happening. Like I'd find his towel on my side of the rack, even though he never used to hang it there. Or how he started sitting closer on the couch, his knee brushing mine and not moving. Once, we reached for the same bag of chips at the same time, and instead of laughing it off, he just let his hand rest on top of mine for a beat too long. One night, we were watching a movie, some dumb thriller we'd both seen before. He stretched out beside me on the couch, legs propped on the coffee table, eyes half-lidded. I was curled at the other end, nursing a beer I wasn't even drinking. Halfway through the movie, he glanced at me and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." He hesitated. "Why haven't you asked me to move out?" The question hit like a sucker punch. "What?" I said, caught off guard. "I mean, I know this is weird. Us. Whatever's happening. I figured maybe I was making it harder on you." I stared at him. "Do you want to move out?" "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. "I just don't want to screw things up." "You're not," I said. His eyes flicked to mine. "Then what are we doing?" That was the question I'd been avoiding for days, maybe weeks. I sat up, putting the bottle down on the table. "I don't know, Evan." He nodded, looking away. Okay. We went back to watching the movie, but neither of us was really watching. The air between us was thick. Too quiet, too loud. I could feel him beside me, feel the way his body shifted, like he was trying not to inch closer. Then the power flickered. Just once. The screen went black, then came back. But in that split second, something broke open. Evan turned toward me. I keep thinking about that night. I didn't pretend not to know which night. "I do too," I admitted. He leaned in, slow, cautious. Not like someone making a move, but like someone hoping I would. And I almost did. I almost met him halfway. But I froze. I don't know why. Fear, maybe. Or maybe it was that same voice in my head that always told me, when things are going good, it probably means you're about to wreck them. Evan stopped. His face was close. So close I could feel his breath. But he didn't close the distance. Instead, he pulled back. "I'm not gonna push you," he said softly. Then he stood up, walked to his room, and closed the door. And I just sat there on the couch, heart pounding, the taste of something unspoken sitting heavy in my chest. After that night, things weren't just different. They were raw. Evan and I didn't avoid each other, exactly. But there was this cautious space between us. Like we were both waiting for the other to blink, to act, to explain what the hell this thing was. He still handed me my coffee in the mornings, still played his music a little too loud when he showered, still left his sneakers by the door in a way that made me trip at least once a week. It was the same routine, same house, but now I felt everything, every glance, every brush of his shoulder when we passed in the hallway, every goddamn heartbeat when we were in the same room. Then came Friday. We were both home early. Unplanned. Unspoken. I was half lying on the couch, headphones in, pretending to be focused on some dumb podcast. Evan walked in and stood there for a second like he was deciding something. Then he sat down, right beside me, closer than usual. I didn't move. He didn't either. A few minutes passed before I took my headphones out. "You're quiet today," I said. He looked at me, really looked. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "You. Me. That night. All the things we're not talking about." I swallowed. "Yeah, same." He leaned forward. resting his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it had answers. "I like you, Tyler," he said, voice steady. "More than I meant to." The words hit me like a wave. Simple, honest, dangerous. I stared at him. "Why didn't you just say that before?" "Because I didn't want to mess up whatever this was." He finally looked at me. "But I think I already have." "You haven't," he blinked. "Then what are we doing?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. He stood up, jaw tense, hands flexing at his sides. "You don't have to feel the same way. But I'm tired of pretending like we're just roommates. I'm tired of backing off every time it almost means something." I stood too, my chest tight. "It does mean something." "Then say it, Tyler." The silence stretched. "I don't want to lose you," I said finally, quietly. "You won't. You don't know that." "No," he said, "but I know I'm not going to keep holding back because we're scared. Life's already short as hell. Why waste it?" I looked at him. The anger in his voice was gone. He wasn't pushing. Just standing there, wide open. It hit me then. He wasn't asking me for anything more than the truth. So I gave it. "I like you too," I said. "More than I should, more than I expected." His expression softened, just a little. "I don't know what the hell we're doing either," I added, stepping closer, "but I know I want to figure it out with you." That was all it took. Evan moved first. No hesitation this time. His hand found my waist, his fingers pulling me in, and then his mouth was on mine. The kiss wasn't perfect. It wasn't smooth or choreographed. It was real, messy, breathless, full of all the questions and answers we hadn't dared say out loud. My hands gripped his hoodie, and he laughed into the kiss, like he couldn't believe this was actually happening. "I've been wanting to do that since the first night we stayed up talking," he murmured against my mouth. "Then do it again," I whispered back, and he did. Again, and again. The thing about crossing a line is that you can't pretend it didn't happen. Evan and I didn't talk much after that kiss. Not because it was weird, but because it wasn't. We just sat on the floor, side by side, legs stretched out, fingers brushing. We didn't need to say anything. It was all already there. Later that night, he fell asleep on the couch, his head on my shoulder. I didn't move. I didn't even want to blink. I just sat there, watching the city lights flicker on the ceiling, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. It was the calmest I'd felt in months. The next morning, things weren't awkward. We made coffee. We argued over who used the last clean mug. He teased me for being grumpy until I threw a dish towel at him. But somewhere between the sarcasm and smirks, there was something new. A quiet understanding. We didn't put a label on it. Not right away. We just lived. Evan would come into my room late at night, toss himself onto my bed, and scroll through his camera roll while I worked. Sometimes he'd read out loud from whatever weird article he was into that week. Sometimes we wouldn't talk at all. He'd just fall asleep beside me, his hand curled loosely over my wrist like a habit. I started noticing little things, like how he'd hum when he was deep in thought, or how he always left one headphone in, even when he wasn't playing anything, or how he'd steal my hoodie, wear it like it was his, and pretend not to know what I was talking about when I asked where it went. One night, a few weeks later, we were walking home from a late dinner. It was warm out, San Diego kind of warm, where the breeze carries just enough cool to keep you from sweating through your shirt. We passed a bar blaring early 2000s pop punk, and Evan started singing along, badly. I laughed and nudged him. "You're ruining a classic." "You mean improving?" He shot back, grinning. We stopped at a corner, waiting for the light. He looked at me then, like really looked, the way he did that first night on the balcony. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Better than I've been in a long time." He nodded, then reached over and took my hand. Just like that, no show, no big gesture. And I realized this wasn't just something temporary. something in between. This was the thing. Not fireworks, not chaos. Just two people choosing each other every day in all the little ways that count. The kind of love that sneaks up on you. Quiet, solid, real.